The 4 cups, the Dalikosos, really play a central role on the night of the Seder. From the beginning of the Seder, right till the end of the Seder, and a couple times in between, we're drinking these cups of wine, or perhaps grape juice. And our rabbis found one of the central psukim that discussed the redemption from Egypt. It was actually the promise that God promised us that He would take us out of Egypt, as symbolic of these 4 cups. If you look on the source sheet in front of you, for those who don't have, there are a couple on the back there on the chair. The Torah says, God says, "Lachein emor libnei Yisrael, ani Hashem." Therefore say to the children of Israel, I am God, v'hotzeti etchem mitachat silos Mitzrayim, and I will take you out from the burdens of the Egyptians. V'hitzalti etchem me'avod asam, I will save you from their bondage. V'ga'alti etchem bizron etuyah, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm of Mishpatim Gedolim. V'lakachti etchem li la'am, and I will take you la'am, as a nation. These 4 expressions, v'hotzeti, v'hitzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti, our rabbis point to these 4 expressions and say, therefore one should drink these 4 cups of wine as symbolic of the redemption of the freedom. And the chiyuv, the obligation to drink these 4 cups, is really almost universal. Men, all men, have a chiyuv, have an obligation to drink the cups. What about women? So, if we look in number 2, the Gemara in Safin says, although this seemingly is a time-bound commandment, nonetheless, women too have this obligation. The Gemara in Safin tells us, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Nashim chayavos ba'arba kosos halalu sha'af hein hayu ba'oso hanes. Women have an obligation to drink the 4 cups, for they were also in that miracle. And perhaps not only that they were part of the miracle, but as some of the Mefarshim, the Rashbam, and others note, they really played a crucial, vital role in the redemption. This chud nashim tzidkaniot, in the merit of the righteous woman, we were redeemed. So we have men, we have women. What about someone who can't afford the wine? So unlike almost all other mitzvos, if you can't afford it, then the Torah exempts you, ones rachmana patre. Nonetheless, in the mitzvah of the 4 cups, the Shulchan Aruch says you must sell the shirt off your back to go buy wine for the 4 cups. And the truth is, the Gemara in Safin even has an opinion that children have an obligation in drinking the 4 cups of wine. So it's really something which we don't find anywhere else. So we have men, women, perhaps children, rich, the poor. It's an obligation that's really universal. But what is the obligation? What do I need to do? What do I need to drink? And historically, for the most part, the drink of choice was always wine. While there was potential to make grape juice, as we'll see, the Talmud even discusses such a possibility. Nonetheless, the preservation and the storage was very difficult, and make it pretty much non-existent. It was very unpopular and pretty much non-existent this time of year to have grape juice. The grape juice discussion, though, it's really fascinating when it really came to the fore, and it was near the beginning of the 20th century. What happened near the beginning of the 20th century that would bring grape juice, this discussion of can we or can't we drink grape juice or unfermented wine?
Refrigeration. Prohibition.
So true, refrigeration allows us for the storage, but there was something else, and that's what Chaim mentioned. Prohibition. Right? In the 1920s, different countries had different times exactly, but January 16th, 1920, the 18th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution took effect, banning the sale, manufacture, transportation of all alcohol for consumption. Now, as Jews, this is the problem. I don't need to go into detail, right? When a child is born at his breast, we drink. Every Shabbos, for Kiddush, we drink. At the end of Shabbos, for Havdalah, we drink. For holidays, we drink. When someone gets married, we drink, etc., etc. Drinking is a big part of our religion. So what did we do? The different states had different ideas, but in New York State, for example, the Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform movements gave a list to the state of rabbis that were qualified to have the rabbi permit to give out alcohol for consumption. There were exceptions for sacramental religious use, and these rabbis were qualified to determine who was applicable, who was capable of using the wine. So it would seem to be straightforward. Unfortunately, there was abuse of the system. If you Google it, you can still find New York Times archives. March 30th, 1921, front page of the New York Times, $250,000 worth of wine was confiscated from the Menorah Wine Company on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Okay, the number again, $250,000. This is in 1921. Of wine was confiscated because they were abusing the system. They were giving out wine to whoever came in, they weren't checking, etc. And this wasn't an isolated incident. There was lots of abuse of the system. So what did we do? So the Reform and Conservative movements sat down and said, okay, let's determine if we can have something else instead of wine. Let's have grape juice, unfermented wine, non-alcoholic. So they sat down, they had conventions, the Reform permitted it, the conservative Rabbi Louis Ginsburg, and I thank a good friend of mine, Menachem Butler, for sending me the original Tshuva. Rabbi Louis Ginsburg, who's recognized as really the leader of conservative Judaism. He taught at JTS for over 50 years. He published a long Tshuva, a long response to them, analyzing the halachic acceptability of grape juice. And he concludes that grape juice, or unfermented wine, could be used as an acceptable substitution in all areas of religious life. So where do we look? What are the sources? And after seeing the source, what are some of the potential problems with grape juice or this unfermented wine? What would be the issue? And it seems quite straightforward. If we look at source number 3, and don't look at the beginning of the source, but if you skip to the end of the source, Da'amar Rava, for Rava said, Sochet Adam Eshkol Shalamatim Va'omer Alav Kiddush Hayom. What does that mean? Sochet Adam Eshkol Shalamatim, one can squeeze a bunch of grapes, a cluster of grapes, Va'omer Alav Kiddush Hayom, and then proceed to recite Kiddush. Again, these sources are not addressing the Dalet Kosos. We're going to get to there eventually, but it's a question in general about grape juice for Kiddush. And the Gemara seems to say you take grapes off the tree, off the vine, you squeeze them, and poof, you can make Kiddush. Clearly, this is not fermented wine. So what are the problems? What are the issues? If we look, and I'm not going to read through number 4, you can do that on your own, but this is, I got a line, how grape juice is made, yes?
Earlier on said it was a conservative and reform movement that said it was okay for grape juice, but you did not specifically say for the Orthodox.
Correct. The Orthodox didn't seem to budge. They didn't seem to address the issue. And the truth is, we'll see later on, there was a response, published a fierce response to Rabbi Louis Ginsburg's tshuva, written by an Orthodox Rabbi in Connecticut, who basically said, absolutely not, we're sticking to wine. But, I mean, if you look in shuls today, if you look in most homes, grape juice seems to be accepted. So where did that happen? When did it happen? And, what was the hesitation?
So does it become a halachic issue, or just basically that's to some extent the Rabbanim have said, okay, due to circumstances, now it's okay that you can do it.
So let's see.
Excuse me, why specifically wine? That's something I really don't understand. Why wine?
As opposed to what? What would you
As
list?
opposed to something else to drink to have an time.
So wine was, I mean, the truth is, historically, wine was really one of the only drinks that were around, and it was seen as something which is chashuv, something which was distinguished and important. We'll see a little bit later on in this year if there are other alternatives and when one can use them. So if we do look at this source, number 4, how grape juice is made, again, I'm not going to go through it, but basically once you get the grapes, if you skip to the paragraph that begins, next comes a heating process. That's really what we have to deal with. Next comes a heating process, whereby the grapes are fed into the heated vat, and the heat brings out the full, rich color and flavor of the Concord grape. And if you keep reading, it discusses exactly what the heating process was and what it accomplishes. And if you look near the end of the page, it discusses that there were 2 other pasteurization processes that occurred when grape juice is manufactured, when grape juice is made. What's the issue? Who cares? So grape juice is heated, it is cooked. Why is that a problem? So the truth is, there are a couple problems. Problem number 1 is the bracha. What bracha does one make on wine that was cooked? Now, you're staring at me blankly, and you could be staring at me blankly because most of the wine we drink is actually yayin mevushal, is actually cooked wine. But it's not so simple. If we flip over the source sheet, source number 5, we have a passage from Tosfot. And Tosfot actually quotes the machlokes, a debate as to which bracha one makes on yayin mevushal, on wine that has been cooked. Again, we're talking about wine that has been cooked, and our discussion is grape juice, but again, it's the cooking process that we're looking at. What does Tosfot say? Aval yesh lahavi raya meYerushalmi deshkalim u'da'arvei ksafim. One can bring a proof from the Jerusalem Talmud in Shkalim as well as in Ksafim d'yayin gamoru, that wine that has been cooked is wine. It doesn't undergo any change just because it's been cooked. Da'amar Hassam, as the Gemara says, Arba kosot she'amru yotzin b'yayin mevushal. The 4 cups one can fulfill by drinking yayin mevushal. If you can fulfill the 4 cups by drinking wine that has been cooked, obviously it is still considered wine. Alma mikachin ayayin mevushal. And therefore, Tosfos concludes, based on the Yerushalmi, that one can make kiddush on yayin mevushal. However, he quotes the opinion of Rashi. Udalo compares Rashi v'harash. Rashi and the Rash, another one of the early Rishonim, they disagree. They write, Shekaslu the yayin mevushal mevarchin alav shahakol the ishtani the griuta the ein laharifkan. They claim that on yayin mevushal, on wine that has been cooked, what is the proper bracha? Shahakol. Shahakol niyabit barot. The same bracha I make on my apple juice is the same bracha that I should be making on my cooked wine, or for our purposes, my grape juice, which has been cooked. That is the opinion of Rashi, and the Rashi, the ishtani ligriuta, because it has been downgraded. The cooking process, in their opinion, downgraded this juice to the level of any other juice. Just like on apple juice, there's no special bracha for apple juice or for orange juice. It's shahakol. So the cooking process, in their opinion, downgrades the wine or the grape juice to the level of the other juices, with its bracha being shahakol. So this is the machlokes. What bracha does one make on cooked wine, cooked grapes for our grape juice? The approach that seems to be accepted, the approach that the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, accepts, is that on yayin mevushal, on cooked wine, one does say borei pri hagafen, as we are familiar with. And therefore, one, for our cooked grape juice, in theory could say borei pri hagafen. So we seem to have solved that problem. In terms of the bracha would be borei pri hagafen. But we're not out of it yet. Because this just tells me that I make a borei pri hagafen. The correct blessing for cooked wine or grape juice is borei pri hagafen. But there might be an additional problem, and that is if I can use cooked wine for Kiddush at all. What's the issue? The Gemara in Menachos discusses the nesachim, the wine libations that we pour onto the Mizbeach. With every korban, we pour wine on the Mizbeach as part of the korban. What type of wine can you pour on the Mizbeach? So the Gemara in Menachos has a list of wines that are excluded, that cannot be poured. And guess what? In that list, among others, we find yayin mevushal, cooked wine. Wine that has been cooked, has been heated, cannot be poured on the mizbeach. So what? What does that have to do with us? As long as we don't bring any karbanos, we should be okay, right? So flip back to source number 3. Flip back to that first part of the source, the part we skipped before. And the Gemara here in Bava Batra says, Amar Rav Zutra Bar Tovia Amar Rav, Ein Omrim Kiddush Hayom Ela Al Hayayin Hara'ui Linaseh Al Gabe HaMizbeach. One may only recite Kiddush with wine that is suitable for libation upon the altar, upon the Mizbeach. If the Gemara in Menachos just told me that I cannot pour yayin mevushal, cooked wine, on the altar, then it would seem from the Gemara here in Bava Batra that I cannot make Kiddush on such wine. They seem to be intrinsically connected. Not so simple though. Why not so simple? Because the Gemara in Bava Batra doesn't stop here. The Gemara continues. We don't have the continuation, but the Gemara then continues and says, okay, so which types of wine are excluded? We made a statement that you can't make Kiddush on things which you can't use on the Mizbeach, so what are those things? And the Gemara has a whole back and forth and a continuation and concludes that we're discussing which wines with bad smells, a foul smell, and wine which is megula, which was left uncovered. No mention of yayin mevushal. The whole sugya, you could read the whole page of the Talmud. There is no mention there of yayin mevushal. It doesn't appear in Bava Batra. So on the one hand, the Gemara Menachos said for pouring on the mizbeach, yayin mevushal is not appropriate. We have the Gemara Bava Batra, which seems to connect Kiddush and the pouring of the wine on the mizbeach, and yet leaves out yayin mevushal, leaves out cooked wine. If you take a look at the Rambam would seem to take the Gemara very literally, and anything which is possible, anything which is invalid for pouring on the mizbeach, one cannot make Kiddush on. And therefore, if we read together in number 6, Ein mekachin ela al hayayin hara'il lenasech al gabe mizbeach. One can only recite Kiddush on wine which is appropriate to be poured on the mizbeach. The fichach im nit'arib bo dvash o se'or afilu kitipat achardal bechavit gidola ein mekachin olam. Therefore, if you have a drop of honey or yeast, things which cannot be poured on the mizbeach, even if it's only a little drop, it doesn't matter. You cannot make Kiddush on such wine. Kaf anu morin bechol hama'arav. That is how we advise in the West. However, v'yesh mishamatir, there are those who allow. There are those who allow such wines. The omer lo nemar hayayin haray lenasech al gabe hamizbeach. So how do they learn the Gemara, which seems to say if wine cannot be poured on the mizbeach, you cannot use it for Kiddush? Look what the Rambam says. El lahotzi yayin sherecho ra, wine with a foul smell. Oh, megula, or wine that was left uncovered. Both of those are in our text in the Talmud. And then look what the Rambam adds. Oh, mevushal, or wine which was cooked. All these wines, ein mekachin al echad mehem. The Rambam takes it for granted that according to all opinions, there's no way anyone can make Kiddush on yayin mevushal. There's debate in terms of wine with honey or yeast, which is actually not for now, but that's actually a very important point that he makes. There were those, the Brisker Rav and others, that wouldn't use wine which had any sugar added for this reason, because you can't use on mizbech dvash or sour, honey or sweeteners, and therefore any sugar added would not allow the wine for Kiddush. Again, that's not the general approach, but the Rambam does say clearly that yayin mevushal, wine which is cooked, cannot be used. But on the other hand, as we mentioned, the Gemara in Bava Basra seems to leave out yayin mevushal. It doesn't include yayin mevushal. So in Shulchan Aruch quotes two opinions. One opinion saying you cannot make Kiddush on yayin mevushal on cooked wine. The other opinion saying you definitely can. And the Shulchan Aruch concludes that one should rule leniently. One should be allowed to make Kiddush on yayin mevushal. And that seems to be the general practice. It seems to be the general practice because, as we mentioned, even our wines, forget grape juice for a second, even our wines, a lot of the wines we buy in the store today are yayin mevushal, are cooked wines. They're cooked for other reasons to avoid questions of non-Jews touching our wine, etc. Not a discussion for now, but a lot of the wine we drink is yayin mevushal. That seems to be the general approach. Rosh Hafter notes that Rav Soloveitchik was actually machmer because of this Rambam not to use yayin mevushal, wine which was cooked, for Kiddush throughout the year. Nonetheless, many are makel, many are lenient, and we seem to allow yayin mevushal, and therefore would allow grape juice that has been heated.
So then will you also allow grape juice that is not mevushal?
So then, the mevushal aspect of wine and grape juice that we do nowadays is to prevent the other issue of the non-Jews touching our wine. In terms of this, it would seem that grape juice which is not considered mevushal would be better. Now, what does it mean, grape juice that is not mevushal? There are different degrees that we would heat up the grape juice to, and according to some, it would be considered non-mevushal. According to others, any time it has undergone heat, it is by definition mevushal, and therefore any grape juice you buy by definition is yayin mevushal, is grape juice mevushal. One final issue with the grape juice is the fact that it's non-alcoholic. And the truth is, this issue was really the main issue that we mentioned before. Rabbi Yitzchak Simcha Hurwitz, he was a Rav in Hartford, Connecticut in the 20s, and he published the fierce response to Louis Ginsburg's tshuva. He didn't mention him by name, but he was clearly referring to him, and he used all sorts of words to describe who he was talking about. And he really attacked this point. He said, our grape juice does not ferment. It's true we read together the Gemara in Bava Basra, which says you could take the cluster of grapes, squeeze them, and make Kiddush. That's clearly not alcoholic. Nonetheless, those grapes will ferment. If we would leave that juice, it would ferment and become wine. Whereas our grape juice, because of the pasteurization, because of the heat, it will not ferment, and therefore one cannot use it during the year for Kiddush. Now, the truth is, in terms of the science, I believe they say it's not actually true. If you take your Kedem grape juice or whatever other grape juice you use, you take off the top and you just leave it on the table, you leave it out. I don't know exactly how long it would take, but eventually it would ferment. If you add sugar, it will go a little bit quicker, but it would ferment. So the science isn't exactly true. However, the point is still true. We pasteurize our grape juice in order to prevent it from fermenting. That is the point of the heat. That's the point of the pasteurization. L'maisa, what do we actually do in practice? It seems to be that aspect, for Kiddush at least, doesn't really bother us. And perhaps because of the science, because it will eventually ferment, or perhaps because there aren't really so many sources which say that the wine or grape juice for Kiddush has to be alcoholic. Where do we get that from? That was an assumption that was made, which doesn't really seem to be seem to be backed up. So during the year, for your regular Kiddush, it would seem to be that grape juice would be permitted. That seems to be the prevalent practice. It's worth noting that the Magen Avram Karabiner does mention that fermented wine which is alcoholic, is preferable throughout the year, and the Mishnah Berurah does cite this. Nonetheless, grape juice would definitely be a perfectly legitimate substitution. But now let's move to Pesach. Yes?
Just a question. The bracha we say says nothing about fermentation, says nothing about alcohol. The bracha is Borei Pri Hagafen. Okay, it's the fruit of the vine. So why all the discussion about alcohol?
Correct. So, I mean, in terms of when we're cooking it and making it non-alcoholic, the discussion would be as Rashi, as that Tosfos quoted, the Ishtani Ligrusa, that maybe we're downgrading it, that maybe Borei Pri Hagafen, it gets this chashuv, this important, distinguished bracha, only because it has these characteristics. Maybe it's because, and perhaps one of those being the alcoholic component. It's true, it doesn't seem to say that specifically, which is why we argue, and that seems to be the position we accept. But that was really the basis of that argument against Louis Ginsburg, yes.
You could say that you're in some ways altering and downgrading, by adding the gas, by adding sugar, by adding peach,
Yeah, that's
so
a
anytime you alter something, you are changing. Potentially, you can say, I'm altering and downgrading.
So that's a great point, and the truth is, it's really on some level seems to be subjective. Are you downgrading it or are you upgrading it, right? Clearly people like it, people are buying it and selling. So it's a great point. But in terms of those that hold you're downgrading, like the Rambam talked about adding sugar and the opinion of the Briskov, they would say that any change would be downgrading.
Good. I'll ask him.
So now let's move to Pesach. What about the 4 cups? Is that just the same as during the year? We learned what would be the potential problems with the wine during the year. We seem to have solved them on some level. There are those who are machmir, who are stringent, but many seem to be makel. What about the 4 cups? Is there anything different on Pesach night that would change this discussion? And I think the key to this really is the one line you have in front of you in source number 7. The Gemara says, Shisan Chai, one who drinks the 4 cups, Chai. What does Chai mean? Chai literally means raw. It means undiluted, because in the times of the Talmud, the wine was very strong. It had to be diluted with water, and the exact ratios vary. We'll see very shortly. So you pour in 2/3 wine, 1/3 water, or exactly what the ratios were, we'll see. But the wine had to be diluted. So Shisan Chai, let's say one drinks the wine and he doesn't dilute it. He drinks it straight, without any water added. Amar Rava, Yedei Yayin Yatsa, Yedei Cheruf Lo Yatsa. He has fulfilled his obligation of drinking 4 cups of wine on the night of Pesach. That obligation he's fulfilled, but there's an added component, the component of cherus, of freedom, that we're supposed to feel when we drink the wine. Like the free man that we left Egypt, that component is missing. That component he has not fulfilled. Why not? So let's look down to the next source right away, the Rashbam, one of the grandsons of Rashi. What does he say? Klomar, in other words, Ein zu mitzvah shlema. This is not a complete mitzvah. She'ein chashivut ela beyayin mazug. For only diluted wine is chashuv. It is distinguished. It is important. Ein zu mitzvah shlema she'ein chashivut ela beyayin mazug. And then he continues to say that this is only the times of the Talmud when wine had to be diluted. Writing in his day, wine no longer had to be diluted. The wine we get from the store is clearly drinkable and no longer has to be diluted. But that word, the word that's in bold, chashiva, that is an important factor. The Rashbam says one who drinks wine in its improper fashion, ein chashivut. It's not chashav, it's not distinguished. And the truth is, other commentaries, other Rishonim have other words. The Ran seems to say that wine, specifically on the night of Pesach, has to enable simcha, happiness, has to bring you to a state of happiness, which we know seems to suggest the alcoholic component. And the truth is, contemporary poskim really take these words seriously. Rav Moshe Feinstein, for example, says that word of the Rashbam, chashuv, it needs to be distinguished, it needs to be important. Therefore, grape juice is not considered chashuv. That's not considered something that's distinguished. Grape juice you buy on the street. Wine is something that's considered of importance, not grape juice. And Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, who was the Rav in Yerushalayim in the 70s, he says also from that word simcha that it has to be able to bring you to simcha. It must be alcoholic, which would mean, according to these opinions, that grape juice for the 4 cups, although during the rest of the year for Kiddush, it's fine, it would mean that for the 4 cups on Pesach night, it would be a problem. The truth is, you can solve these issues potentially with adding a little bit of wine into your grape juice. If you have your cup of grape juice and you add a little bit of wine, potentially, I mean, you can argue back and forth, but potentially you solve the issues of chashuv and of alcoholism. It's worth noting the opinion of Rav Soloveitchik. Just let me catch this opinion, then we'll get to the question. It's worth noting the opinion of Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik looks at the Rambam in source number 9 and disagrees with what I just presented. If we look at the source, Arba kosot ha'elu sarif limzo lotan kedei shetiyeh shtia areva. These 4 cups, they must be diluted with water to guarantee a pleasant drink. Kedei shetiyeh shtia areva. Hakol lefi hayayin. Everything depends on the exact type of wine, and lefi dat hashoteh, depending on the person. So he says it's totally subjective. The purpose is that you drink a pleasant drink. Hakol lefi hayayin, hakol lefi hashoteh. It would depend on the wine and depend on the person. And therefore, Rav Soloveitchik says, if we read this Rambam, it seems to be the point of drinking the 4 cups is kedei shetiyeh shtia areva, a pleasant drink. And therefore, if I hate wine, I don't like wine, and I like grape juice, that's a pleasant drink for me, then grape juice would be permitted. Grape juice would be, in fact, encouraged. You had a question?
Yeah. Well, here's a couple of things. Number one, the person can say they happen to like watermelon. Okay, so they go, like Mexicans have a thing that they make what is called a watermelon drink, which is like pure watermelon, right? And they can get ecstatic, they can get happy, etc. So that's a drink which is
correct.
Okay. And you can talk about grape juice as a separate thing. Let's say, for whatever reason, you drink wine, you always fall asleep. So if you would be mitzvah, that you should also need to stay up, to be able to complete that, get that, to tell the story. If you're asleep, you have what we call your mitzvah. So the idea is to keep awake, to be able to complete the mitzvah, and to also enjoy what you're drinking. If you're enjoying what you're drinking, which happens to be grape juice or a mishteh.
Correct. You're 100% correct. There are definitely other components of the Seder which we must ensure we fulfill. And the position you seem to be accepting is really what Rav Soloveitchik just presented. That the drink of choice should be the drink that you enjoy. Whether you enjoy the taste or you enjoy it because that's going to help you get through the night, that should be your drink of choice. But just to recap so far what we've seen, these are some of the potential pitfalls of the grape juice, of the unfermented wine. Number one, the bracha, in terms of is it hadaf and is it shahakal. Number two, yayin mevushal, cooked wine in general, is a question. Again, both of those issues seem to be answered. We seem to assume that both of those are okay. And the non-alcoholic component, which again, most don't seem to be bothered with. In terms of specifically the dalkosos, we have these words which some contemporary poskim seem to really focus on. It has to be chashuv, it has to be important, it has to be distinguished. while others, like Rav Soloveitchik, suggest that really the ikr, the focus should be what is pleasant. What is pleasant to you? I asked Rav Strachel before we started. He said that he recommends wine for those who can handle it, but for those who cannot, then grape juice is a possibility. Grape juice is okay.
Does that mean that you could have wine mixed with, say, water or with something else
So
to dilute the wine?
So it's a great point, and that's really what we've seen in the Talmud, and these sources seem to suggest that wine can be diluted. That I think everyone should ask their specific rabbi, because some would argue that today's wine is already diluted to the point that one shouldn't be diluting it more. If you're diluting it with grape juice, which is an alternative which we seem to say is okay, so that would be permitted. But to dilute it with something like water or something else, I think that should be asked. But the truth is, just to conclude, as the hour gets late, thank God in these situations this doesn't really seem to creep up. We generally have wine, or if we don't have wine, we have grape juice, we have the alternative. But the Shulchan Aruch does rule that if we have nothing else for the delicacies, for the 4 cups, one can even use Chamar Medina. One could use a drink which is of some significance in the state, in the country. So orange juice, tea, during the rest of the year, beer is a possibility. And the truth is, in the Shut Mimamakim, which was Shuvos written of Rabbi Shri, that he got during the war years in the Kav Megiddo, he got questions and he wrote them down and he gave his responses. So in the Kav Megiddo, he told people to fulfill the mitzvah of Dalet Kosos, of the 4 cups, with tea. That was what was available. That is what he told them. But just to close and really come back to an idea we began this year with, we mentioned that an ani, the poor person, must sell the shirt off his back to fulfill this mitzvah of the 4 cups. But really our job on Pesach, and our job before Pesach, is to make sure that it never comes to that. Pesach specifically is a time where we give tzedakah, we give charity, to make sure that everyone has what they need for the Pesach Seder. And the story with the Beis Halevi, the original Rav Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveitchik, Rav Soloveitchik's great-grandfather, really captures this idea. A woman approached the Beis Halevi and asked, can you use milk to fulfill the mitzvah of the Dalet Kosos? Can I use milk to drink my 4 cups? So based on what I just told you, what did he answer? Yes. Milk he considered to fulfill the obligation of Chamar Medina, and therefore said if you have nothing else, if you don't have an alternative, you can drink milk for the Dalet Kosos. But then on her way out, he gave her a substantial amount of money. Not just enough money to go and buy wine or grape juice or whatever was available, but much more. And those around the Beis Halevi at the time asked him, why? I understand you wanted to give her money, so give her a little money to go buy the 4 cups of wine. Why did you give her so much? And the Beit Halevi, in his great wisdom, explained that one needs to look beyond the question that is being posed. She's asking, can I use milk for the 4 cups of wine? What is the answer? As the rabbi, what do I tell her? Yes, you can use milk for the 4 cups. But if she's asking, can I use milk, it means she clearly does not have any meat or chicken for her Seder. She knows that we can't have milk and meat, milk and chicken together. She clearly can't afford the meat. She cannot afford the meal at the Seder. And therefore I slipped her the money to make sure that not only can she go buy wine for the 4 cups, but that she could have her Seder needs met. And that's really what we do this time of year. Thank you very much for coming, and I wish everyone a kosher and a sameach.